It's been the warmest year on record, a NASA scientist has said, and ice in the Arctic Sea is expected to bear the brunt of it. The Arctic is one of the most visible signs of a changing planet, warming twice as fast as anywhere else in the world. Over the past 3 decades, the amount of sea ice there has dramatically declined. This year, Walt Meyer says, we're on track to see the least of it. Without ice, the Arctic loses its cooling mechanism. The implications are both widespread and devastating.
And basically, it's like we're opening up the refrigerator door, so the Arctic's cooling mechanism is becoming less and less efficient as we lose the sea ice. And the Arctic is connected to the rest of the climate system. The Arctic is not like Las Vegas. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And so as we are warming the Arctic, we're changing the balance between the cold Arctic and the lower latitudes. That potentially changes weather patterns, and we're already seeing evidence of that in terms of how the jet stream is changing. It's becoming less of a west to east flow and more of a loopy flow, kind of more north to south, which leads to more extreme events, things like droughts, things like torrential rains and flooding.
The issue of global warming has been a key topic in the US presidential campaign. Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton sees it as an immediate concern, but Republican rival Donald Trump dismisses it as only minor.
Nowhere on Earth have those warmer temperatures been more evident than the Arctic. Arctic ice, which in recent years remained rock hard year-round, is melting and melting at an alarming rate. CCTV's Sean Caleb spent several months reporting from the Arctic, and he joins us to explain the risks. You saw it firsthand, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. NASA is talking about it to a great deal, and the news is simply sobering, especially on the heels of the important summit in Paris last year, where nations came together in an effort to keep global temperatures from inching up just 2 degrees centigrade since the start of the Industrial Revolution. NASA researchers detailed the effects of Arctic warming, which is twice as fast as the rest of the world.
The sea ice cover that's decreasing, that has big implications for climate because the sea ice is like a cap on the Arctic Ocean, and it's a reflective cap. It's white. It reflects most of the sun's energy during the summertime. And so that helps keep the Arctic cooler and essentially acts as a cooling mechanism, kind of like a refrigerator for the global climate. But as we're decreasing sea ice over the years during the summertime, now the ocean is absorbing that energy. It's heating up the ocean and it's heating up the atmosphere. So it's kind of like we're opening the refrigerator door as we lose the Arctic sea ice.
One thing that really jumped out last month when NASA talked about the extremely warm conditions, the fact that already globally, we've jumped about 1.5 degrees Celsius since the dawn of the industrial age. And thinking back to the Paris climate talks, that really China and the United States had a very lead in that, saying we have to find a way to pump the brakes on this. What are the concerns? Is it realistic at all to think that over the next quarter of a century, we're going to be able to keep temperatures down?
As temperatures are continuing to rise, I think it's going to be a challenge, and a challenge for policymakers and for economics and so forth to try and do this. What we're doing at NASA is to really provide the best data that we can, as well as modeling that we can, to inform decision makers, inform policymakers, to make informed decisions on what needs to be done, what policies need to be implemented. So at NASA, for the Arctic, for example, we have Operation Icebridge that we've been flying for several years. We were just up there last month taking measurements over the Arctic sea ice. We're flying again. Actually, next week we're heading up there to fly over Greenland. We're also preparing ISAT-2, which is a new satellite mission that's going to be launched in 2018. And these will really give us much better information, more detailed information on the changes that are occurring and how we can expect these to change in the future and what the impacts are going to be on the global climate so that we can inform the policy decisions.
You know, in 2012, there was melting over 97% of the Greenland ice sheet, and all that fresh water pouring to the ocean area. Are there concerns that we are adversely affecting things such as airflow, species, water streams, things of that nature?
Yeah, certainly. We're definitely affecting things with the loss of the Arctic sea ice and Greenland. For sea ice, it grows and melts within the ocean, but because of this reflective action and reflecting the sun's energy and the refrigerator effect, as we change the sea ice, that has effects outside of the Arctic. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And so we're already seeing some indications of changes in like the jet stream that steers weather patterns. It's becoming more loopy and kind of has more north to south loops instead of just a straight east to west or west to east flow. And that has an effect of slowing down weather systems, causing more extremes. And then with Greenland, the primary effect with the big losses of mass in Greenland, the surface melt and calving icebergs, that's land ice that's going into the ocean. That raises sea levels. And so we're seeing an acceleration in the sea level rise, partly due to the Greenland melt.
And as the Greenland ice sheet melts, more and more fresh water pours into the ocean, and it means the sea level will rise. Now, this is a huge concern because some 80% of the people in the world live within 100 kilometers of the ocean. And Mike, roughly 1 in 10 live in an area that is considered low level. So people in Shanghai, people in Miami in the United States, they're all faced with a somewhat uncertain future.
He mentioned Greenland. We know that you've traveled there as well. What's at stake there?
Well, it's interesting because he talked about if you have sea ice and it melts, it's like having a glass of water with ice in it. And if that water melts, the level doesn't go up. However, if you take ice that's on land and pour it into the ocean, the sea level rises. So you're seeing dramatic melting, not only in Greenland, but also in Antarctic and the South Pole. And as that happens, it really threatens to dramatically increase sea levels. This is going to be a long-term effect, but they have seen historical melting in the last 4 or 5 years.
We're talking a lot about ice. We're not talking as much about people, but you brought that element to the story as well. The Native Americans or the Native Alaskans there, the Native people, it's impacting them and their livelihoods.
Yeah, without question. We saw that, and that's another thing because one thing NASA talks about is those people are kind of the canary in the coal mine, if you will. They are people that first noticed the ice was becoming thinner and thinner and began telling scientists. And 10, 15 years ago, scientists were saying, oh, you're mistaken, you're mistaken. Well, now they realize just how accurate they were. And they break the ice down into 3 levels. There's seasonal ice, which forms and melts every year. Second-year ice, which lasts 2 years. If it lasts longer than 2 years, it's called multi-year ice. That is the rock-hard ice that has been up in the Arctic forever. It is that multi-year ice that is melting as fast as anything, and that is going to have a huge impact globally.
And this reflection concept, I haven't really ever thought of that. And he talked about best data. It's not just best data. It's when you look at the images and what's out there, it's chilling data. I mean, this is scary stuff, isn't it?
It is chilling stuff. And I asked him if you're hitting the alarm button right now. He's a scientist. He's not a policymaker, so he avoided that kind of term. There you see a weather balloon that's going up in Barrow, Alaska. Now, what happens? It's called aerosols. These black flecks of soot that drop not only on the Arctic ice, but also in ice fields that are in northern Alaska, in Russia, in other areas that are in the Arctic. Now, as this soot begins to touch down on this white ice and white snow, again, the sun it absorbs the sun's energy, doesn't reflect it. The good news here, scientists say that yes, there is a chance that this is perhaps the easiest thing to take care of. If we can get rid of these pollutants, if we can get rid of these aerosols, then it's going to make a somewhat significant improvement, if you will, somewhat quickly in these areas where this soot is building up. They are researching it. They're trying to find ways to combat it, but admitting there is a problem is one of the first steps.
Sean, thanks so much. Lots to digest there.
An ice shelf is an area of floating glacial ice where the glaciers in Antarctica flow downhill and eventually start floating on the ocean, where they're melted from the ocean beneath and the atmosphere above. Larsen Sea Ice Shelf is on the Antarctic Peninsula. It's about 2.5 times the size of Wales. And the reason we're interested in it is that it sits just south of Larsen A Ice Shelf, which collapsed in 1995, and Larsen B Ice Shelf, which collapsed in 2002. For the last 10 years, we've known that Larsen C was getting lower in the water, but we haven't known why this is. We used 15 years of radar data to look at the changes in this ice shelf. We found that the ice shelf was losing ice, and this is probably due to ocean melting from below. And we also found the ice shelf is losing air from its snow, and this is probably due to atmospheric warming. So what we know now is that the ice shelf is subject to a two-pronged attack from above and below.
The ice in an ice shelf is floating, so when it melts, it won't have a big impact on sea level rise. The impact on sea level rise comes as the glaciers that feed the ice sheet no longer feel the resistance from the ice shelf there, and so they flow more rapidly and put more ice into the ocean, and that causes sea level rise. We know that after Larsen A and Larsen B, a fairly large fraction of the total Antarctic contribution to sea level rise comes from those glaciers that once fed those ice shelves. Larsen C is bigger, and so the impact of losing Larsen C would be a significant extra contribution to sea level rise, above the thermal expansion of the oceans and above the extra the contribution from the larger part of Antarctica down in the West Antarctic ice sheet. When Larsen A and Larsen B were lost, the glaciers behind them accelerated, and they are now contributing a significant fraction of the sea level rise that's emerging from the whole of Antarctica. Larsen C is bigger, and if it were to be lost in the next few decades, then it would actually add to the projections of sea level rise and the rate of sea level rise by 2100. We expect that sea level rise around the world will be something in excess of 50 centimetres higher by 2100 than it is at present. And that will cause problems for coastal cities and low-lying cities. Understanding and counting up, adding up all of these small contributions from Larsen C and all of the glaciers around the world is very important if we're to project with confidence the rate of sea level rise into the future.
This research was all about trying to understand when humans started changing the climate through the burning of fossil fuels. So it was really answering that question, when did global warming begin? And the answer that we found was quite surprising. It's really humans started altering the climate in around about the 1830s. I'm Nerily Abram. I'm a climate researcher. I work at the Research School of Earth Sciences at the Australian National University. So when manufacturing was really just sort of starting off and we were really only just starting to harness fossil fuels, even those small increases in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were enough to make a measurable impact on Earth's climate. There's some strong regional patterns in the way that this human warming signal first developed. So we see it really clearly in the tropical oceans and over the northern hemisphere continents, whereas in the southern hemisphere it took a little bit longer for that warming signal to really start. The Antarctic is a really interesting place, and as a whole, Antarctica doesn't yet show a clear signal of human-induced climate warming. And part of that is just to do with the way that the circulation of the ocean and the atmosphere works in the southern hemisphere, and that pushes any warming sort of further north and away from Antarctica. Some of the samples are samples that I've actually collected and worked on in the lab, but really this is much of a much bigger project than that. So it draws in work that's been done by thousands of scientists across the world and brings that all together to answer this really big question. It's really important to know sort of how our climate responds, which parts of the Earth respond most quickly to changes in greenhouse gases. And that's really important, particularly if we're talking about how we might rectify problems of climate change in the future, knowing sort of where there could be rapid paybacks if we are able to reduce emissions and even pull some of that carbon dioxide back.
高处通过这样一些水渠流了下来以后，全部聚集到这个街道上。
啥道道本来？
水当时已经到这儿了。
这儿。
对，一个在那边，一个摩托在那边。这个摩托车。
哦，现在这个门已经被埋了有一半深了。只能这样钻井，包括房屋上有很大的裂缝。
走你！不要看哪了。姓王？王记者。
Tokyo was battered by heavy rain and strong winds today after a powerful typhoon made landfall just south of the Japanese capital. Some 500,000 residents were advised to evacuate, and at least one person died. Winds gusted up to 112 miles an hour across the city, and swollen rivers sparked fears of flooding. Elsewhere, a commuter train derailed and hundreds of flights were grounded.
Typhoon Mindul has been downgraded to a tropical storm, but not before leaving a trail of destruction across Japan's Hokkaido island. At least one person has been killed and dozens injured after Asia's 9th cyclone of the season made landfall south of Tokyo on Monday. Torrential rain caused rivers to burst their banks and disrupted travel across Japan's main island. Air traffic controllers were forced to temporarily abandon their tower in Tokyo's Narita International Airport as wind speeds reached over 125 kilometers per hour, while here at the capital's other main airport, hundreds of domestic flights were cancelled.
Monsoon rains have come down hard over large parts of central and northern India. Many homes were submerged in floodwater after rivers continued to flow above the danger level. People living in low-lying areas of the North Uttar Pradesh state were fleeing to safer ground. We are facing a lot of problems, says this local. There's no way to get food, drinking water or boats. We don't know what to do. Water has been gushing into the area for the last 3 days, he says. All the land has been inundated with flood water. All the crops have been damaged. Water has started coming into our homes, he says. Excessive monsoon rains in India regularly cause floods, which often spread waterborne diseases. Local organisers struggle to cope with the challenges they're faced with.
At least 300 people have lost their lives following catastrophic floods in eastern and central parts of India. The devastating floods caused by monsoon rains have also forced over 100,000 people from their homes in recent days.
We're getting you a ground report of how flood fury is wreaking havoc in various parts of India. The worst affected state is Bihar, where at least 12 deaths have been reported. From Bhojpur in Vaishali, 6 deaths have been reported, and many people displaced from different parts of Bihar. There have also allegations that there is additional water being released from the Madhya Pradesh dam, which is creeping in the state and causing more loss of life and property. We also have a ground report being filed by my colleagues. Take a look.
Bihar reels under massive floods. With rivers in spate across the state, over 22 people have been killed and 23.71 lakh have been affected. Nearly 20 districts remain submerged in Bihar, Bhojpur among them accounting for the maximum number of deaths, followed by Vaishali and Bhagalpur. With the flood situation worsening in the state, Chief Minister Nitish Kumar said that he's monitoring the relief and rescue operations. And in an utterly insensitive remark, RJD Chief Lalu Prasad called the flood victims lucky to get Gangajal at their doorsteps. As Bihar grapples with swelling rivers in neighbouring Uttar Pradesh, the Ganges and Yamuna continue to swell. In Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, the situation continues to remain grim. More than 30 people have been killed in these states, forcing thousands to move to safer places. While Bihar remains the worst affected due to floods, with the death toll reaching 127 this year, a total of 103 people have been killed in Madhya Pradesh in flood-related incidents, followed by 17 in Rajasthan and 10 in Uttar Pradesh. Heavy monsoon rains have definitely ended 2 successive drought years, but the downpour has triggered evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people from flooded homes. Bureau Report, India Today.
When the Blue Nile River tore through Fatima's home, there was little time to do anything but escape. The muddy water has now receded, but its destructive power is evident in the little that's left of her home. One of the few things of value that she could salvage, a photo of her husband who died 10 years ago.
I have no place to live. I don't even have a piece of land. I only have God. I've lost everything.
Her story of devastation and loss in the state of Sennar echoes that of tens of thousands of families across large parts of Sudan. It's rainy season here. Flooding is common, but this year's rainfall has been particularly heavy. Flash floods destroyed more than 13,000 homes. Many Sudanese have lost everything. As the waters recede, clearing the smelly, thick sludge left behind is the next challenge.
We are trying to shift the silt from our house, but it seems futile. I don't know what to do. This is the situation we face.
The lack of clean drinking water is a health hazard, and malaria is another concern. There's little prospect of relief, with heavy rain forecast until at least September. Miriam Nahond, Al Jazeera.
The northern Spanish region of Navarra has been hit by its worst wildfires in 30 years. Fueled by high summer temperatures and strong winds, around 3,000 hectares are estimated to have been destroyed. Dozens of fire crews were battling the blazes throughout the night on Thursday, which are now said to be contained but not extinguished. No fatalities were reported.
In California, more than 10,000 firefighters spent the weekend trying to put out 6 large wildfires. An hour east of Los Angeles, fire officials are still assessing the damage from a fire that torched more than 300 buildings, including more than 100 homes. Mireya Villarreal is there.
Outside San Bernardino, the Blue Cut fire exploded out of control, roaring through the Cajon Pass like a runaway train. Today, thousands who were evacuated are anxious to see whether their homes were among the 300 structures destroyed in this fire. In Northern California, the Clayton fire tore through 4,000 acres and almost 200 homes, including Matthew Porter's. He was tending to the U.S. Olympic fencing team's equipment in Rio when he heard the news.
Coming to see it, difference between knowing it mentally and when you come and see it, that's when it kicks in.
Along the coast, the chimney fire is threatening the historic Hearst Castle in San Luis Obispo County. Fires near Santa Barbara and Bakersfield have burned through a combined 36,000 acres. In just 1 week, these 5 fires, fueled by 100-degree temperatures, strong winds, and years of drought, destroyed nearly 100,000 acres.
As long as we have these conditions, we're going to see intense fires.
Costa Dillon is with the National Park Service.
We used to think in Southern California that the Santa Ana wind season, that is the fall, was when fires were at their greatest danger. Now it's all the times.
The Blue Cut fire is now mostly contained, but Elaine, fire officials tell us it is still too dangerous for people to come back home who live in this area.
Mireya Villarreal, thank you.
Good morning. Captain Larry Kurtz here from Orange County. A wildfire spotted in eastern Oregon has quickly become one of the state's largest active blazes. Fire officials say the Cherry Road fire has scorched nearly 50 square miles of brush and grass near the Idaho state line.
Unbelievable.
Violent weather spawned a string of damaging tornadoes across the Midwest. At least 21 twisters were reported yesterday in central Indiana alone.
Dozens of homes were damaged or destroyed, but no one was reported seriously hurt. Indiana Governor Mike Pence, the GOP vice presidential nominee, will tour the damage today. Jerika Duncan is in the hard-hit city of Kokomo, north of Indianapolis, where a state of emergency is in place. Jerika, good morning.
Good morning. You can see behind me that this tornado practically flattened this Starbucks. Now, it was an EF3, which means maximum winds of up to 165 miles per hour. So you can imagine the fear, the terror the people inside must have felt when they realized the tornado was headed their way. A violent outbreak of tornadoes tore through the Midwest Wednesday.
Right there.
Injuring more than a dozen people, ripping the roofs off of homes and leaving behind a widespread path of destruction.
I just heard thunder and rain. I didn't know what was going on, and I just looked out and went, oh my.
A massive EF3 twister barreled through the city of Kokomo, Indiana. Frightened customers inside this restaurant watched as the powerful winds leveled a Starbucks.
Oh my God, Starbucks just got blown over.
No one inside was seriously hurt.
All of a sudden I heard a loud bang, and I looked up at my ceiling and it actually caved in.
Witnesses say it took just seconds to tear apart this apartment complex. Kathleen Marsh took cover in her bathroom.
It blew my window out, and then that was it. I just ran downstairs. I was just so scared.
Hundreds of people were forced out of their homes in Howard County, and more than 35,000 people were reported without power across the state.
We'll be here as long as we need to be to make
Stepping away from the campaign trail, Indiana governor and Republican vice presidential nominee Mike Pence said it was remarkable that no one was seriously hurt.
I want to say Hoosiers are breathing a sigh of relief after a very tough day of weather, but there's a lot of hurting families out there, and I encourage every Hoosier to remember these communities in their prayers.
Governor Pence will be here later to check out some of that significant damage that you saw here in the piece. Now, the schools here in Kokomo are closed, and more severe weather is headed to the Central Plains and Ohio Valley. Anthony?
Some terrifying pictures. Jerika, thank you.
The fire is going to burn until there's a season slowing or season-ending event. We'll often get those in early mid-September. Half an inch of rain will really slow it, and we often get that. Season-ending event is usually October 1st. Before that, we'll be able to open the roads. We're still working on developing a safe plan to do that, but the roads will be open far sooner than that. But the fire itself will burn until there's rain or snow.
And a fast-moving wildfire in eastern Idaho has now spread to 70 square miles. Some evacuations are in place. The fire is burning the habitat of a federally protected bird. Sandy Kozel, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
What not to do in floodwaters. Just because you have a pickup truck doesn't mean you should drive through it, ladies and gentlemen. Please stay safe. It's starting to rain again in Westport. The water's coming down a little bit, but it is still awfully high and very, very, very